Hey, Chris.
Hey, Mark.
How are you?
I'm doing great, and I wanted to say to you, welcome to the Outro Zone,
Ooh.
where we take the Intro Zone, the show about the SharePoint Intelligent Intranet, out here to Ignite.
Very nice. And that is the value and the beauty of what you're actually hearing beyond Chris and I. Sometimes we're in a studio and it's beautiful audio and nice and quiet. And here we're having some beautiful audio with some ambiance.
We're on the edge of the expo hall, so if we look over to my right, your left, we can see there's some food and beverage areas because it's happy hour here at the expo hall. And then thousands and thousands of folks over visiting the Microsoft booths and our sponsor booths to kind of learn not just about the latest of our technologies, but about what our partners are bringing in.
And I think you've been kind of busy, not just today, but yesterday.
Yesterday I spent the day delivering a conference pre-day on content services, what we used to call ECM, a topic we'll be doing in a future podcast in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And today supporting some of the keynotes with some of the demos that are running from backstage, which is a nice break for me. And then later this week, I have sessions on Biz Apps, Power Apps, and Flow, and also I'm doing that with Chucks. And then Dan Kogan and I are doing a session on Wednesday on content services. How about you?
Excellent. Well, I was, like I said, over at the expo hall. I spent about 2 hours there, and I remember two events ago, about 2 years ago, the most common question was, how do I tell me about what Office 365 is? And then cut to last year, it was more of, I'm in Office 365, tell me what I can do with it. The common thing that I heard today was we are still seeing a lot of classic because we're still thinking about going modern, or we're just now moving into the cloud, with our classic components, not just starting fresh in the cloud. So a lot of people are asking about how to get from classic to modern. So that was sort of a big topic. Ironically, it's part of what we'll be talking about on Wednesday. I have a session with Sue Hanley. So we're going to be talking about building the modern intranet from a perspective of strategy and planning. And then I've got a session later in the week with Jeremy Masner about what we're doing with team sites and teams connected together, and also that a little bit of a difference of articulating best how to use OneDrive and SharePoint from a files perspective.
I think classic modern is one of the axes that gets discussed here. Another axis is Teams and SharePoint. It's a ubiquitous question about how to take everything that we build and put them together. Some think of it as a versus question or what to use when, but that's definitely a topic that's in the forefront of customers' minds.
And the thing that I find is a lot of times they have a perception based on a conversation or something that they heard, but the second that they see it, the second that they see how easy it is to move from classic to modern, or the value of having a SharePoint content like a page or something like a mini dashboard inside of Teams. And the to-do it part is just a couple clicks and obviously know what content you want to put together, but then put it in where you need to.
I do think this conference is a little bit like the blind man and the elephant, in that no two people have exactly the same experience of this. 35,000 people spread over miles, dozens of hotels. But bringing it back to our topic, our technology topic, one thing that's of interest in the ECM space is we're seeing a lot more customers they have a historic investment in partner tools or competitor tools or SharePoint on-premises legacy, and have we put together enough compelling management capabilities in the cloud? Is it time for them to make the leap? These are trailing indicators of the market, right? These are not the people who want to jump on the latest and greatest things. These are law firms and compliance officers, but it's interesting that they're kind of finally coming around to saying, I think maybe this year's the year.
But so as busy as we're going to be talking to Jeff Teper, who's probably 3 times as busy as we are, and certainly has a lot of great insights into everything at the conference and everything beyond the conference.
Yeah, knowing what his schedule looks like, and we've gotten to see it, I'm surprised we're getting any time with him at all.
You know who he is, Jeff Teper, Corporate Vice President of SharePoint, OneDrive, and Office. And we got a chance to sit down with him here at the Microsoft Ignite Conference 2018 to pick his brain a little bit to see what he was doing here at the event and outside of the event, what he's doing to influence his team. So in the background, you might hear some mumbling. That's not hungry people. That's not angry people. Those are people that are enjoying themselves here in Orlando, Florida, because we are live at Microsoft Ignite 2018. And we have a super special guest, Jeff Teper.
Thank you,
Welcome.
Mark.
Thanks for coming.
And full disclosure, we're catching up with you just after the keynote here at Ignite.
That's right. Check that one off the list. Another keynote done. I think it was the best one we've done yet.
I think so too. Just to be a little bit more clear on who you are and what you do, Chris and I have, of course, mentioned you on the podcast a couple of times, referencing what you and the team are doing. But how would you introduce yourself and your full title? How do you say it these days?
So I run the services in Microsoft 365 focused on content collaboration. So that includes SharePoint and OneDrive, the core Office applications, and Microsoft Stream, and a few of the other parts of the family we're really excited about. Project, Planner, Forms, the
A few
cabal
things.
around content collaboration.
And I just also curious, how did your world change when you kind of brought in that Office component? You know, I've always thought over the course of the years, it's SharePoint, OneDrive, pretty straightforward. But when you put into Office and then everything else you just said, how did that change?
It was a little bit of full circle, because when we got started with SharePoint and we really doubled down in the investment early on, we referred to SharePoint as the server for Office. It was part of the team. We planned new features of, we take it for granted now, Office saving to SharePoint. A little over a year ago, when Rajesh Jha, who runs the Experiences and Devices group now, asked me to take on program management and design leadership for the core Office apps, he asked me sort of from two sides. One is he'd seen the velocity in the OneDrive and SharePoint team in the last couple of years and wanted us to emulate that in Office. The other thing was just thinking about content collaboration end to end. And I'm really excited some of the things we sat down and worked on at that point are now part of the news at Ignite. So search in the headers in the Office applications, app mentions, the deepening of the commenting and co-authoring capability inside Office powered by OneDrive and SharePoint. And so it's a great team, and it's been an honor to connect the two more back like we did at the beginning.
One thing it's really fun to watch is, we've been watching, obviously, a little bit biased, but all of the great ways we've made SharePoint and OneDrive easier to work with, and more queues and more design things to just make everyone more productive. And I love seeing some of the stuff that's coming to the forefront this time at Ignite with like ideas in the Office clients.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the big themes we have is we've got and we refer to it in the keynote as this concept of power made simple, that people do need all these capabilities to create great content or analyze data in Excel or create a workflow in SharePoint. But it can't be overwhelming, particularly at the beginning. And people don't want to take the time, maybe as much as they did in the early days of the PC business, and go read the 1,000-page book on inside Office. And so what we've got to do is be more clever and have a more Spartan user experience where the software knows and anticipates what content and actions you want to do and suggests those to you in context. And so one of the big announcements we made this week is this idea called ideas. I need a better way to describe it than that. But that Office is looking at your slides and suggesting alternative designs. It's looking at the table of data in your spreadsheet and inferring trends in that data. It's looking at how you've written a lengthy Word document and suggesting more appropriate, more grammatically correct, more effective language. So we're going to bring, these are things that all could have been commands under the toolbars and ribbons in the past that really are there latent, and hopefully we're going to be helpful to the user. And it's a machine learning based system. So as we give people ideas, it's up to the user whether those ideas are good or not us. And that feedback from the user will help us train the system to make those ideas more effective for everybody.
So there's one particular idea that I want to drill into, and it's going from the macro scale to the micro. You got a one-line email from Satya, and his idea was SharePoint needs you back, come by tomorrow. Would love to hear your reactions when that landed in your inbox.
That was about 3 years ago. When he came in as CEO, I had a chance to do something new. I've been on SharePoint for a long time, and it was good to step back and sort of have, as Satya quotes the Carol Dweck book, Growth Mindset, look a little more outside in. So I got to run corporate strategy working for our CFO, Amy Hood, for a year, and she's an amazing leader and so fundamental to the company's transformation and in partnership with Satya. But I said I'd do it for a year, and it was a great learning experience. but I wanted to come back and build product again. And so I'd been talking to Satya about a few different things. And he and Rajesh co-conspired to ask me to come back to SharePoint, which I was honestly surprised by. And I went and met with Satya and said, should you really go home again? Is that a thing to do? And he got me going on, the challenges and opportunities we had with SharePoint. And I said, well, we want to go big with it. And he and Rajesh doubled down on letting us invest and grow the team and do things that within a few weeks we'd written down the things that ultimately came to be the new user experience model that became the SharePoint framework, the integration with what became Flow, the communications, collaboration, integration that became Teams. A lot of these things didn't even have code names at that point, but it was great to get the support from not just Satya, but groups across Microsoft to take SharePoint to the next level. And so I was honored to do it. I was surprised, but it's now 3 years back. I'm really glad. I guess that's why he's the CEO.
It's great to hear about your second coming into SharePoint, but I'd love to kind of go back to the very origins. We were chatting before about the first time you heard the word SharePoint, because this was a homegrown product for us.
Yeah, one of the things that's really interesting that's a book or podcast series in itself is branding in the tech industry. And there's many fabulous stories about that, like Bill Gates coming up with Microsoft. It was a novel idea at that time of having a software company that was standalone from hardware and betting that software company on the microprocessor. And so Microsoft, Apple and Amazon are obviously interesting brands. And so I hadn't really worked on anything like that before in my career at Microsoft. And so your predecessors, went and hired one of the top branding firms in the industry, a firm called Lander. And we sat and brainstormed with them, and they did user research and tested. And some of the other names were Microsoft Office Server, Microsoft Document Server, Microsoft Portal Server. And then we had some names that didn't have equity in them and didn't have any preconceived notions, like SharePoint. And there was a bunch of those. And I remember them all being on the board. And there was a big push from the marketing side of the company to go with Office Server, Portal Server, Document Server. And I really pushed back on Document Server. It's just too limiting. The content's going to be more broad than just documents. I was intrigued by Portal Server because immediately you could say you're the category leader in this. You've named your product after that. You don't have to build much equity in the brand. You have Microsoft and Portal. But we also weren't really sure if Portal was going to be a long-term thing. And was it going to be intranet? Was it going to be Portal? Was it going to be digital workplace? And so that was a little risky. And then Office Server, a lot of people liked that and pointed to the success we had with Windows and Windows Server, and that part of the vision for what became SharePoint was that it was the complement to Office. But we did some testing, and they found that Office was so prominently perceived as a desktop piece of software that it was going to be risky to name a server after it, that users actually found that confusing. Now, the same was true with Windows Server, and we probably could have gone with it. And so we wound up narrowing down to some of the names that we could invent what they meant in their positioning. And we saw the list of names on the board they came up with, and we immediately latched onto SharePoint because it felt like it was very flexible, but it was simple to understand, and it had that connection to PowerPoint. Oh, SharePoint, SharePoint, PowerPoint. That must be, worked on both levels. It was the point where you shared information, but because it had this resonance with PowerPoint, it felt like an already established Microsoft brand and product. So we went with that. Along the way, as people will probably remember, we couldn't resist the temptation to make it complicated. So it was actually Microsoft SharePoint Portal Server and Windows SharePoint Team Services and
Microsoft Office SharePoint Server.
And so can I poke at your guy's boss a little bit?
Please.
Are we allowed? He doesn't listen to the podcast.
Well, we'll find out, right?
Chris Capicella, who's our CMO and a brilliant marketer at the time, in 2007, we wanted to position Office as more than individual productivity and have it be team and organizational productivity. And so we came up with this concept of the Office system that had the desktop apps and SharePoint Exchange and Lync, because we didn't have the cloud then, and we needed to talk about the family. And so I just said, can't we just call it SharePoint? Why does it need? And so it landed as Microsoft Office SharePoint Server, or
Moss.
Moss. And I
We're
said,
still
Chris,
scraping that off of
Chris,
some rocks.
please. And I said, yeah. And he reinforced for me. He said, you got to take one for the team for a little bit. I know you're right in the long term, but in the short term, it's really important that we have the Office brand not just stand for end user authoring tools. And so we want to link it to the server products to establish that we have a client server solution for productivity. And so he was right. And we now can, of course, talk about Office 365, and we don't bat an eyelash that Office is not just a desktop piece of software, but we went through the journey that we were afraid to do in the early days of naming SharePoint Office Server. We didn't in Moss, and now it's all just part of Office 365. So anyway, that's probably more than you wanted to know.
That is exactly what we wanted to know.
But it's funny, back then I remember trying to convince some of my colleagues who were convinced that this new SharePoint thing back in the 2001 days was just a Word doc server. And I said, it's in the name. It's more than Word. You can put PowerPoint in it.
Yeah, that's, to this day, we just finished this keynote in 2018 where we started off with web-y intranet stuff, then we got into team site stuff, and then we ended with document stuff. And it is both the blessing and the challenge of this product, in that it does website stuff and document stuff. And I believe in the end, the success of SharePoint is the leader in content collaboration, is because we combined web content management and traditional file or Office document management into a single solution. Because there's no other competitor that's done that in the market, really, it means we've had to define content collaboration differently than anybody else. And that means more work for all of us marketing the product. So yes, we're a website and a file-making machine in the same box.
Well, we'll keep cranking it out. One of the things that Chris and I actually talked about a little bit in a past episode, based on some LinkedIn posts that you had put out there, based on Satya's book called Hit Refresh. Your posts were around hitting refresh. And I'm curious what that means, really, especially looking at a lot of our new announcements, which is just continuing to hit refresh for SharePoint, OneDrive, Office. How does Satya, from a leadership perspective, encourage you all to embrace hitting refresh, which I would imagine at an engineering level sometimes is a scary move?
Every industry goes through transformation, and the companies that don't transform sort of wind up being lapped and surpassed. Every industry, that's true. And technology is making that happen faster than ever. And of course, especially in the technology industry, that if I think about the early days when we strung Exchange and SharePoint together in the data centers and called it BPOS, then let's not talk about that one. But there was a lot of people that said organizations were not going to go to cloud computing. And so that is really canonical what's happened in our industry, that if you don't transform, if you're not ahead, if you're not thinking about the next era of business models or technology architectures, you are going to be lapped by somebody who's willing to take more risks. And so Satya came in, and we were on a cloud strategy before he came in as CEO. He led that the Azure group, but Steve really emphasized we were all into the cloud, and so we were building Office 365 in Azure. But Satya doubled down on that in terms of investment, but also I think set a really important tone in terms of culture. He's fond of this quote from Peter Drucker that is, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." Of course, our strategy is pretty straightforward. There's a total addressable market in technology that's being disrupted and grown because of cloud computing. We're participating in that because we've got a big base of customers and so forth that we can bring, and partners we can bring to the cloud. But the cultural transformation of learning how to ship every day, obsess over customer feedback, doing experimentation was a big change for us. And I think the beauty of what he hit in his book was that our own transformation in our company was seen as inspirational for other companies, our customers, in their journey. And so we could be a bit humble and vulnerable and say, look, we had some big successes, business models and technologies changed. We had to lean into that change. Some of those transitions were easy, some of them were quite hard. We had some successes, we had some failures. And I think that makes you very authentic and credible with customers, because we went on the other side of it, and of course has grown the company in the cloud. And so I thought that the things he's really emphasized on us, and you guys all see it too, is having a growth mindset, obsessing over customers, thinking about one Microsoft. It's not the SharePoint team or the Teams team. We're one company. Was pretty key for us. So anyway, with that as a framework, we sat down after I came back into the team and talked about what do we really need to do with SharePoint. And I had been thinking in the back of my head while I was working for Amy Hood in corporate strategy and meeting a bunch of startups and playing with a bunch of technologies, what would I do? And one of the biggest things was open source, that we used to in Microsoft think we had to write every line of code ourselves. Sometimes we wouldn't even depend on another team in the company, let alone an outside company. And if you talk to all these startups, they wrote the least amount of code possible and leveraged as much as they could from the open source community. And so I said, let's not fight the wave, let's leverage the wave. And so the new SharePoint user experience was built on JavaScript and a bunch of open source technologies, including something called React from Facebook. We had different things in Microsoft, but that was the one that had the most momentum. And now huge chunks of the Office apps, the Outlook web app are built with that React technology base. Doesn't mean we don't write our own proprietary software that on top of that. So there was a lot of things around leveraging open source, doing experimentation. We, as you know, all know, grew the size of the design team pretty dramatically. We were really conservative on the engineer to program manager to design ratio. The first route I had ran SharePoint, because we valued design, but we thought the program managers were basically the designers, and the designers were the ones that laid out the pixels. And that's crazy. A lot of the program managers are wonderful, talented people, but maybe they graduated in computer science or business, and so they're not trained industrial designers. A lot of them picked it up. But we said, no, the program managers are going to define the user needs, the outcomes, prioritize the backlogs, but designers are going to design. And so Ken Fry, who leads the OneDrive and SharePoint team, with Denise Tribono, who runs the SharePoint UI, who's here at Ignite giving a session. They're amazing. And with all due respect to the people who worked on SharePoint design 10 years ago, oh my God, it is night and day. John Friedman, who runs Office Design, working for me. We had him in the keynote to show some of the things we're doing. So we leaned into the cultural focus that Satya had. We doubled down on simplicity and user experience and design. And we leveraged a lot of open source technologies. And there was lots of other things I wrote in the LinkedIn series, but those are the ones that are sort of top of mind.
I have to say personally, I appreciate the investment in design, because when we come to a conference like Ignite, one of the best things that can happen for me in the prep time is when Denise has a few extra minutes and was like, hey, can I look at something? I want to give you some suggestions and ways to make it look better, which is wonderful that we have those resources, not just for us, but for what we can do for our customer experiences.
Yeah, I remember a lot of times when we were building out demos for big events or what we would hand to our field, there would be so much time and money spent on making it look beautiful. Not to knock SharePoint, but there was a lot of work to get it to what customers would actually put as their portal or usability for their customers. And now that we're actually touting, and I think customers are actually picking it up, to use so much out of the box, because it is built by somebody that maybe they would have paid a couple of months to do a lot of work, now it actually translates into everything that Denise does is what somebody would have paid somebody to do anyway, and now
Yeah.
they don't have to.
You know,
Yeah,
I love that we still call it out of the box, even though we haven't put this software in a box in years.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So, Jeff, I wanted to ask you just a couple of things about Ignite because, you know, obviously the run up to it with strategy reviews and checkpoints is very close to it, and I think that the keynote is a nice inflection point where you can sort of stand back and look at the output from the team and see what resonates with you. And I'd be curious, what were some of your favorite moments that you got to see during the general session that we just wrapped up?
Yeah, we think about this event a year in advance. One of the things I learned early in my career that I thought was a pretty powerful thing was to, we don't do press releases anymore. We do blog posts and Ignite events. But when you're working on the plan for a release, start with the end. Write what we used to call mock press release. And if you remember when I came back to the team, one of the first things we did was write the mock press release between us and the engineering team and marketing with some concept UX about what we'd want to do at the next Ignite, which was about 12 months away at that point. And so this Ignite, this September, we had an event last October where we had some concept car UX about the kinds of things that we wanted to show. And so to talk about some of those things, we knew that we were on a journey with communication sites to really blow people away with both the simplicity and the usability of the web experience that, as we saw in the keynote, the level of polish, the attention to detail and layout and photography, we really obsessed over that. And, you know, getting deep in the scenarios, you know, we showed this concept called hub sites and how it can stitch together sites in their organization and how it relates to news and so forth. We talked about that a year ago, and so that anybody who ever thinks they saw a SharePoint, I would love for them to walk through the demo with us about what SharePoint is out of the box now. And tomorrow I get to record a mechanics video, and I'm going to walk through a whole bunch of SharePoint sites just to show that. So that's probably the biggest one for me is the communication sites work. Then the integration with Teams and Power Apps and Flow to build these collaborative workflow solutions. So we showed the ability to have SharePoint pages inside Teams, the ability to have lists inside Teams, and then not just SharePoint documents, but the rich SharePoint document user experience. The OneDrive and SharePoint team collaborated on a common set of file controls with metadata and workflow and sync that can show up inside Teams. And we got a lot of applause. I was trying to track during the keynote what got the most applause, and one of the things was the sync button within the Teams. It's a SharePoint site. Of course you could sync it. You don't have to know that using Teams. That's latent under the scenes capability.
And you hope that's how people know it. It's like, yes, of course I'm working with files and I want to sync it. They're not going to ask themselves, is this backed by SharePoint that supports sync and does whatever? But to put it right in front and just say, it's a sync button. If you want to sync your files, go for it.
Yeah. A few more things. The Navjot Verk showed the combination of our migration tools and classification labeling capabilities so that you can set policies for secret sites versus not secret sites. And once a site's classified with those, you can get more security for things like blocking download and external sharing and so forth. And that's a benefit that you can accrue to a migrated SharePoint site. So it's a great example of how we can get you the cloud easily and then not just have end user benefit out of that, but have IT benefit with more consistent policy enforcement. You know, another thing, we closed the keynote with CJ Tan from our team showing some of the AI capabilities, everything from photos features to the integration with Azure Cognitive Services and Flow to build these AI-powered solutions. Pretty amazing if you think back where we started with SharePoint, that people would be stitching together these building blocks. So, gosh, there was so much stuff.
Is it true in that last demo that we're going to be shipping a feature called the cupcake meter?
Yes. That
no muffin can go undetected,
yes.
or it will not get caught trying to disguise itself as a cupcake.
Given that computers are not 100% accurate all the time, we have to give a confidence that it is a cupcake or a kitten or I thought it was a little cruel of us at about 5:30 to show
Yeah.
cupcakes, gorgeous cupcakes. Anyway, so
So it's still early in the week, but I'm just curious, what's some of the favorite things that you've heard coming back from tweets or from customers you've gotten to speak to already this week?
yeah, probably the biggest thing always in these events is it's a strong word, but I'll use it anyway, which is how much of a family the community is. That, lots of times, especially for a piece of business software, you make a product, people use it at work, it does its job, you like it, you pay the vendor, and the vendor gives you updates. And, that's the transaction, and there's economic utility for both sides in it. But this is different. And it was never part of the plan. It sort of organically happened. So a lot of the tweets and people come grab me and you guys here is it's just great to see each other. We have people from all over the world that have an association around SharePoint that love the technology and its ability to make them be smart, whether they're a customer consuming the product or whether they're a partner building solutions on it. So it always, as much as the latest feature, and we did an announcement today called Microsoft Search, where we're bringing all these technologies together and with a consistent user experience around search. That got picked up a lot this morning. But the thing that I know, but I always, relearn when we come here is how this piece of business software is really a family of people all over the world that share a common vision to help people work together better, and they want to help each other do that, and we're just really humbled by that.
Here are some of the reactions from you, the audience, who were in Jeff's general session. Let's take a listen.
Rick Ramhap, Grupo Bimbo, Long Island, New York. This particular session with the Jeff Teper demos and all is the one I look forward to every year because this is where I get the most information I can get. That it basically plans my next year from a SharePoint point of view. So I think a lot of the OneDrive enhancements that I just saw about security and some of those and being able to cut and paste were cut and paste files are very interesting, but also the extension of the full SharePoint experience throughout Teams and OneDrive, and pretty much anywhere you go, it'll be the full experience.
Josie Hostchild, and I work at Concentra Bank, and I live in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. I'm really excited about being able to surface web apps within Teams, so it really brings that SharePoint backend into the Teams experience for those users that use that app predominantly.
Tony Williams, SuperValue.
Darren Weir from SuperValue. This is why we come to Ignite, is for these roadmap sessions, and this one didn't disappoint. It had great innovations with where SharePoint's going, and a lot of things that we've really been looking for are being added, and we're really excited to bring those back to our organization. The integration of the file experience in SharePoint being brought into Teams makes both more valuable, as well as the OneDrive features. The features in Teams that we like commenting on a document, bringing that into OneDrive makes that more valuable. And then finally the one that we just saw about taking my documents and desktop documents and moving them into OneDrive. We've had issues with our end users being frustrated with not being able to work the way they're used to with OneDrive, and this way they can continue to store things on their desktop and it still gets protected, so we're both happy.
So right now we have Microsoft Teams in pilot at SuperValue, and looking at what it is we've just seen, we'll be able to enhance lots of capabilities with this application. So we're looking forward to it.
Yeah, my name is Raj Gupta. I'm with Lumen 21. We are located in Orange, California. The session that we had with Jeff, it was really enlightening, especially around the collaboration with SharePoint, Teams, and all the interaction with OneDrive, and that kind of helps us to make sure in terms of security and compliance that people don't access in unmanaged devices and stuff. So that's been our main target. We take the latest technology, we actually dog food ourselves internally before we roll it out to our customers. So we manage a lot of large clinical enterprises, healthcare organizations, payer organizations. So first we dog food ourselves, and that kind of helps us to set the stage to roll it out to other customers.
Joe Nichols from Amgen from Riverview, Florida. Really, we're driving Teams adoption right now and really rolling out Teams to 30,000 users, so pretty big rollout. From this one specifically, though, there's a lot going on with SharePoint, and I think people are still wanting to know, when do I use Teams, when do I use SharePoint, what makes the most sense? We've got an on-premise corporate portal still as well, and we're trying to figure out, how do we move that to Office 365 and what that looks like most with the communication sites and what we can do around that to improve what our corporate portal looks like as we move into Office 365 with that from on-premise. Obviously being able to integrate Yammer into those communication sites is pretty neat. We've got probably 15,000 active users on Yammer of our 30,000, so finding ways to integrate that into the corporate portal is going to be pretty cool. So I lead a lot of the adoption stuff at Amgen. Really, we're going to have to sit down and kind of set out our roadmap. Obviously, every year at Ignite, so many new things are announced, and got to figure out when they're going to be released and everything. We also do a lot with our customer success manager at Microsoft to plan those out, and then we've got a collaboration network that is our champion network that we start to bounce those ideas off as well to see what's going to be the biggest value add at Amgen.
So a little different topic, but something that we thought when we had some time with you would be a great perspective. So we're just a few weeks after everybody going back to school at all ages and all grades, certainly think in terms of what do students and teachers and, of course, the administration behind them, what do they all do and think, in terms of how technology can support them. But if you think at the Microsoft 365 level and education as a specific market that we think about, build towards, what are some of the things across the projects and the teams that you manage that we do to support education? Yeah. So think about OneDrive, Teams, OneNote, any size.
Yeah. I'll give you two perspectives of it, the outside and the inside perspective. Outside perspective, it is we, of course, visit schools and talk to students and teachers and IT leaders who are responsible for schools. There's education conferences we go to as well as visit individual schools. And teachers and students are incredibly busy, and the schools often don't have a lot of resources, financial resources, technical skills, time. Even when there is somebody with technical skills, they're often incredibly overloaded. And so they're really appreciative that they don't have to set up these servers anymore, that they can just depend on a cloud service. And as we see a great teacher who's inspiring their class, they're using technology in a way where it's about the purpose of education. It's not technology for technology's sake. So we've people building classroom solutions that under the covers are built on SharePoint and OneNote and Teams. The class server solution is great to see how teachers are running their class with it. But probably the thing that stands out most for me is when we see students working on their homework for the first time in OneDrive. Partly what the teachers are trying to do is teach digital proficiency, being able to use Word, Excel, PowerPoint to express their ideas and so forth. But for a lot of these kids, it is they're trying to create something where they're sharing with not just their teacher, but their classmates in observation and insight. I remember back in the day before any of these tools, I did a report on the space program and the Apollo astronauts. And I got up in front of the class with index cards, and I was so nervous. It was like one of the most memorable days of my life was in 5th grade talking about the Apollo space program. And today, the kids who are doing the equivalent of that are doing that storytelling in PowerPoint. And this is really important to them. And because group work is more and more important in society, teachers are going for group digital proficiency in group work. So the kids are often working on that story together in OneDrive and PowerPoint. And how humbling is that we get to work on that? So that's the sort of part that's the outside story. The inside baseball for my Red Sox fan. Folks who don't know, Chris is a Bostonian, and what
Yep.
is it? How many wins? 112 at this point?
Something like that.
Yeah.
You're jinxing me, and I know that's why you're saying
Yeah. No motivation. But this is a super interesting time of year. We do analyze the growth of the SharePoint service over the last several years, and it takes a bit of a dip in June when people go home for the summer in schools, and takes a huge spike in August as the teachers show up and then the students show up. And that spike every year doesn't just return to where it was before, it's significantly higher. And when literally millions and millions of new users show up for the first time, connecting to their class services run on SharePoint sites to their OneDrives. Millions of new users a week versus the previous week, and then it sort of passes the previous record by a lot. And so one of the most fascinating things we do, and you guys touched on this in your podcast with our MCIO group and Zach Rosenfield from our team, is the capacity planning, where we've got to guess, okay, we know we're getting more schools using Office 365, so it's not going to be the same number of students and teachers, but how many millions more? And so we're, 3-4 summers ago, we didn't get this right, and a lot more showed up. And, frankly, we had to throttle the service a little bit to handle the load. This summer, we were well prepared, us and not only us and the Azure team, and I think we've done a good job of it. But it is probably the biggest stress test for the service is that sort of middle 2 weeks in August where the flood shows up in a way that's the biggest spike of the year.
I'd like to revolve to a different topic because obviously SharePoint and OneDrive arose out of that very traditional information worker market back in days when people still had desktops in most cases. And education is one way to look at it, but I'd like to kind of chat a little bit about the first-line worker. According to some statistics, the number of smartphone users in the Middle East and Africa is projected to hit 160 million people this year. So when you think about the first line, what are some of the top-of-mind things for you?
Yeah, some first-line workers are not going to work with Office documents, but some will. Lots of them, of course, will use websites with business solutions and information provided to their employees. One of the examples, and it shows you the breadth of our customer base, that was a case study that was published the last few weeks ago, was the Kazakhstan Airlines, where the people, the pilots, the maintenance crew, et cetera, there's a set of people at the airlines who publish and organize information, and those employees, first-line workers, it's mission critical. You're maintaining the airplane, you're flying the airplane. That's not only critical to customer satisfaction, that's critical to customer survival, that they do a great job. And so we've got, that's obviously a smaller airline. We've got others like Delta Airlines that runs their intranet on SharePoint, and they've been at previous Ignites and talked about the DeltaNet solution that's built on. So we're excited as a content collaboration, creation, targeting system that even though there's a class of employees who themselves won't be spending too much time creating content, that we're giving customers a tool and a business process infrastructure so they can empower their employees. And so we've got many of those from medium-sized airlines to giant airlines, retail. Marks and Spencer's an organization that has run their stores with an intranet built on SharePoint, and Yammer to encourage social interaction from the stores. And so to your point, I think we've just scratched the surface from user empowerment and also business opportunities for our partners. I was talking to Add-in 365, one of our partners who's worked with Wavemaker, who's less of a first-line solution, but more of a digital media solution. But those kinds of partners are helping organizations build intranets for for first-line employees.
Yeah, the thing that I've heard through a couple of the customer stories is they not only want to get information out to them, but that they hope and expect to get information back from them.
Yeah.
Because, like you said, they're on the first line, they're out there, and they're getting the realities of what does and doesn't work. And what better thing to get than a real-world experience that you can share back and refine and hopefully refactor.
And also, we're all first-line workers, most of us, at some point in our lives. You know, you're at your daughter's soccer game and you get an email during halftime and you need to actually try to be productive in the 5 minutes that you have right there.
Very true. So one of the things I saw in the keynote, in the demo, which I thought was kind of a fun thing, it wasn't hidden at all because we shined a light on it, but it was the fact of a new content type embedded on a really beautiful Contoso landing page. And that was an embedded SharePoint space.
Yeah.
The space is embedded. So talk about that maybe a little bit, but we also just want to know, quick update on SharePoint Spaces.
Yeah, this is one where it's all my fault if we didn't get it right. And the team's credit if it turns out to be a big hit. Not last December, but the December before, I wrote a paper called Intranet Meet the Metaverse. When I was coming back to the team, as I mentioned, I was looking at different open source technologies, including what people were doing for programming video games on the web using a technology called WebGL and a real-time communication layer called WebSockets. And I thought, gosh, these games are kind of cool. Why isn't Internet so cool? And there's some pretty hard technical challenges of getting lots of polygons on the screen moving at 60 frames per second, interacting with data and user interactions and so forth. But hey, if the games world is going to push it forward, why shouldn't we use it for employee engagement and productivity? So I wrote this paper, Intranet Meet the Metaverse, and said, let's embrace these standard technologies, WebSockets and WebGL, integrate them in the SharePoint framework, and then do two things. One is embrace 3D content, because there's lots and lots of 3D content already. Autodesk is a great customer who's here. They help lots of people make 3D content, and we want to help show that. And but also have people use 3D to do storytelling, do information navigation, to create 3D scenes that may represent physical spaces or imaginary spaces that just engage people. Because just like the consumer intranet inspired intranets, I think 3D games and mixed reality will challenge and inspire people to create business scenarios using that technology. So we started working on it, and we got code up and running in real code and real designs. We hired some great designers into our team from the HoloLens team. If you're familiar with the HoloLens shell, there's something called the Cliff House, which is a virtual house where you can walk around. We pitched to some of the designers, hey, we know you've worked on this consumer virtual reality thing, but do you have any interest in business customers? They want to have fun too. And so we hired those designers. We embraced WebGL and a framework called Babylon.js and integrated with the SharePoint framework. And we got the code up and running, real code, in time for the SharePoint conference last May. And that was probably the biggest stretch of any event in my career. And I pushed us really hard because, it was the return of the SharePoint conference. And I really wanted to do something special that surprised people. People expect, hey, the next beautiful SharePoint site, the next interactive Office document collaboration demo. But even for the old faithful, I wanted to have them sort of have this holy moment that, is that SharePoint? And so we pushed pretty hard. It was real, and people got to play with it there, but it was pretty early and pretty far from being ready for ship. And so the team's made a lot of progress the last couple months. One of the things we did, now that we were able to tell the story, we were able to get customers to tell us how they would use it. We got a lot of those, thousands of those, and so the team sifted through those and used that to design the site that we published publicly so that other customers could see in customers' words how they were thinking about using mixed reality in 3D. And so we're farther along on the engineering. The team is here. They have a dedicated session on SharePoint Spaces that we weren't far enough along to do in May. We now have enough working to do the dedicated session. And I'm not ready to commit on a preview date yet because this is something you want to iterate and learn on. But I'm very, very bullish. I think 3D content will be more and more prevalent in the workplace. And I think just like people express their creativity in PowerPoint presentations and SharePoint sites, they're going to express their creativity in 3D. So,
all right. Well,
that's my pitch.
I'm going to take
I
your...
funded it, so
hey,
we'll see
you've
how it
already
goes.
said your long bets are usually pretty decent. We've gotten here with SharePoint. We've gotten here with other things. I'm going to join you in that bet, and I think we should author a new children's book for SharePoint called Oh, the Spaces You Will Go.
There you go. You know, there might be some copyright and trademark infringement in that.
I'm going to ask you a question. It might not be totally fair because, as Seth Patton, who's our general manager, likes to say, this is our Super Bowl here at Ignite, and so we're still at the season wrap-up for this. But I'm going to ask you to kind of think a season ahead, and I know that you usually start your next interval by pulling some thoughts together into a memo, and it might not be fair to catch you right now, but what are some things on your mind that you think are coming up important for us to pay attention to?
Yeah, so we have we've tweeted in the past years some some pictures of the team's demo event. We haven't shown, obviously, what we're doing on the stage, but we want to show the community that we're doubling down and investing in SharePoint. It's a big team. We're not resting on our laurels. And so, like I've done the last couple of years, I will write the doc in the next couple of weeks. I've actually wrote the first half of the document, which is what are our business metrics? What's the customer feedback we're getting? What is the competitive environment? What are some key trends we can embrace? And then we've got lots and lots of ideas. And the team's already got ideas for next year. And we did, we've done some design sprints already. But I like to do it right after Ignite because not only did we have the quantitative feedback, things like user voice where people can submit what their top feedback is, but we have the qualitative feedback where we see, how customers tell us about what their scenarios are. I had a chance in the keynote to have David Kaganovsky from Wavemaker talk about what they're doing with their intranet, and then, backstage I got to talk to them for a while. What do we need to do next, and so forth. So we will. As I said, I've written the first half of the document, and sometimes on the plane on the way back, I try to bang out the last half of the document and what our framing is. And then, I'm pretty high. I keep it pretty high level. The team does, the bottom 99% of the work. Ken Fry and the design team, Omar Shaheen and the PM team. But the developers also do work in not just coding and architecting, but ideation. One of the big things we did this year was OneDrive ransomware feature. And the engineers initiated that idea, and there's many other things like it. So I'm not going to tell you yet what's in next Ignite. We will, but I'm going to try to write something down that at least internally gets us motivated to be creative in the next couple months.
A lot of folks from the SharePoint team often have a tagline, this is based on user feedback. We hear you. And, I've actually gotten some statements back from people who are like, no, you guys just do what you want. Or, you're just going where the trends are going. And I can't think that that's further from the truth when I see you tuned into user voice, here at the conferences, at the booth, hearing what people are saying. I can't imagine that, you would even let your team run without talking to customers.
Yeah, but it's a mix of both. That you have to understand customers' needs, but they won't necessarily express them to you in the features they want. So there's a lot of things that are very clear user voice things. The biggest one we've ever done by far is OneDrive files on demand. And it took us a long time to do it because we wanted to do it right. We had a point of view about how it would be done that learned from past experience. But for sure, that was overwhelmingly the biggest thing people wanted from us that we talked about last year and then we showed today on the Mac. But there's lots of things that people don't ask you for explicitly, and if you try to validate it, may actually test quite poorly. Our version of that is the cloud. CIOs in 2006, when we started working on the thing that became BeatPause, were not asking us for a cloud service. There was a couple of visionary customers. The CIO of Energizer Holdings said, look, you guys make this stuff. You should be able to run it best. Why don't you do it? And so there was a couple of customers, but overwhelmingly, when we surveyed them, they'd say absolutely not. And so we had to believe in the economic superiority of the cloud as a hosting and delivery model. The one that, we can't take credit for is the iPhone. Steve, to take the keyboard off the smartphone and use the screen, use the surface area 100% for the screen, which is, what you're doing 80% of the time, is sort of an obvious insight right now. But boy, if you think back then, it was very controversial to take the keyboard away. And so kudos to Apple to be ahead of the game. Like I said, in SharePoint Spaces, it's my idea. 90% of the team is not invested in it. We'll see. Maybe we're right. Maybe we're wrong. And so we do have to balance the explicit requests from people about features they want, where it's clear. Of course they're right. We just have only so many hours in the day to write code. We'll do that. But we also, if we don't want to be disrupted by other companies that are being creative, we have to be creative ourselves and say, what are the unmet needs that customers aren't expressing as features, and let's come up with those. And so,
well, it's like the Henry Ford quote. If it just asks his customers what they want, they ask for a faster horse.
Yeah. Exactly.
My favorite thing is just when engineering, maybe even 5 to 6 years ago, just started knocking on marketing's door. Can you help me get in front of customers? I want to talk to a customer about a specific feature or something they were thinking about planning to test, and not have it be a big tap program, but just actually go and have a real face-to-face conversation.
Yeah, and you have to, again, know, as you guys do, how to not talk to customers. That's a skill. It is definitely a skill to market the product to customers. But the more important skill is to listen to customers, not just explicitly what they tell you, but to ask questions and be curious and listen and listen and listen. And hopefully we're getting better and better at that.
So maybe if we can do 5 seconds, it'll seem like a long time. Because we're here in the expo hall, you can actually hear a lot of customers telling us what they want. So this is the sound of us listening to customers.
I think I heard a customer ask for more taxonomy management features in the background. Should we do that one?
Yeah.
I think we should do something there.
So we have one last question for you. Are you the father, grandfather, or godfather of SharePoint?
I'm a guy that was lucky enough to be working at Microsoft in the time where we started to build server products, and said maybe we should build one for Office. So it always has been, and we couldn't have seen it better in the keynote, be a team effort. And so people like to fixate on individual people for storytelling, and I'm happy to represent the team, and if it's fun, great. But if in a moment where we're ever serious, this is a team sport, and I've been so lucky to be part of an amazing team for pushing 2 decades, and it's a privilege. So
You won't soon be asking us for a favor or anything.
No. I will make you an offer you can't refuse, though.
Well, for reasons that are both obvious and unobvious to the audience, I prefer to think of you as the team captain.
I'll take that one. I like that better than the paternalistic thing, because it really is a team sport.
We'll take that. So we certainly appreciate you taking time. We know it's a busy day. You've been walking, I think, probably more steps than you walk on a normal day.
This place is huge.
This place is really big, and you've been on the opposite sides, going from session to session. So thanks for taking time to come chat. Thanks for everything that you're doing here at the conference, and thanks for everything that you do throughout the year.
Oh, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Chris. You guys do a great job across the board in what you guys do, but I've heard so much great feedback about the podcast, and so please keep it up.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you. So did you know all of that, everything that Jeff shared, or was a lot of that new to you?
It was new to me. I didn't realize that the word SharePoint didn't just descend in a golden cloud from the heavens, but it was arrived at through lots of studious work.
So now we know a ton more about SharePoint. We know a little bit more about Jeff. In fashion as is, we talked about being busy. Jeff is busy, and off he goes. He's on to the next thing. I'm really excited about what he'll be doing the rest of the week. I know today was his big day, and I think for the rest of the event, we've got still a couple of big days to go.
You know, off and running, and literally, as we know, as we learned from talking to him as we were walking in here, listens to the podcast.
Yeah.
So
and we kind of joked with him, like, you must go on pretty long runs if you're listening to our podcast.
So it's been great having you sit in with us here at Ignite 2018, but we've got even more stuff coming up next week. We'll be doing a special episode with Funko, one of our favorite customers up close to us in the Seattle area, talking about how they've managed to swoop in and really work on their intranet makeover.
If you didn't think you knew enough by watching SharePoint Swoop, a couple episodes, 5 episodes total about how Funko uses SharePoint, OneDrive, Microsoft Teams, we drill in, and including some people who helped him on the backstage, Bob German, Sean Squires, but really hearing Funko, where are they now a year later? So I was really excited to catch up with them.
If you've been inspired by some of this conference energy we're bringing from Ignite and want to know where to plug into it, don't worry. There's a number of events coming up. There's a range of SharePoint Saturdays spread out throughout October. I know I'll be at SharePoint Saturday in New England. Following up on that, Jeff and many of us will be going to Copenhagen for the European SharePoint Conference, with more to come after that.
Yep, and really, if you want to drill into all the news and announcements that have been coming out of Ignite, not just what Jeff talked about here today, you can go to the Microsoft Tech community. There's a ton of new blogs that just got released. There's a parent blog that sort of paints the picture at the broad level, but then each of us had an individual blog or two to go into basically all the announcements that we're making here that will be soon coming to production in the coming months.
And you can learn more about the Intrazone on the tech community. And if you need to get in touch with us as well, you can reach out to us at the Intrazone at Microsoft.com, or reach us at mcashman or at cmcnulty2000 on Twitter.
Yes, so thank you for your time today, whether you're here in Florida or in the variety of places that you might be listening to this across the world. We appreciate your time. This is the Intrazone, a show about the SharePoint Intelligent Intranet. You'll be able to find all the links to everything that we discussed today in our show notes on the podcast page. Go to aka.ms/theintrazone. Thanks so much for listening. We're your hosts, Mark Cashman and Chris McNulty. This has been The Intrazone, a show about the SharePoint Intelligent Intranet.